Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big Histories podcast. In our 10-question series, we do the second part of the Roman Empire, the end of unity in the West. So when we left off, Marcus Aurelius, the last of the great good emperors, died. The philosopher king, who wrote the book Meditations on how to be a good Stoic leader, gave way to his son, Commodius, who turned out to be a Herculean cosplayer. Well, you can imagine that's going to cause problems. Bad emperors like Commodius allowed ambitious generals to think they could lead. Out there in the provinces, out there far away, local commanders having the loyalty of troops, fighting against the Persians or Danubian tribes, Gothic tribes, or in the north against Germanic tribes, raiders and such. North of Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian was one of the good emperors. He's going to build the wall that separates the Roman Empire from Scotland. There's not huge major wars and invasions, but there's constant little raiding, constant little prying of the borders. And those guys start thinking, well, if this idiot can run the show, I can do a better job. I can run it. And the problem is if one of these generals starts to think that, the other ones do too. And so what you end up with during the 3rd century crisis is another 100 years of civil war. You have a civil war as these generals compete over who gets to run the show. And in fact, it becomes so unstable, you end up with 25 emperors in 26 years. So none of these guys have legitimacy. So there's no stability, there's no legitimacy. The army itself, of course, degrades as it murders itself. Because when when a general from the northern border comes marching down the Rome, well, a general from the east is going to take his army and sail from Syria to meet him in Italy. And so you have Roman armies in each other. So of course, the borders become weak because there's less and less troops at the border. There's less and less people and Romans who want to go into the army. If that means you're going to end up dead, being killed by fellow Roman soldiers just from a different unit, less and less Romans go into the army. And localities begin to go their own way, especially at the farther ends of the empire. So you get a city like Palmyra out there in Syria that's like, why do we even care about Rome? We got to run things ourselves. We got our own problems. You get places like Britain or Wales, what becomes Wales, doing kind of the same thing. They're like on their own. They're far away. And so they're like, hey, why don't I just do my own thing and build their own defenses? And we've seen this. We see this in the Persian Empire. When the Persian kings started to murder each other, when the Persian royal family started to murder each other, the empire itself didn't break up. The empire itself didn't fall apart. But what it did was ruin with like an acid those bonds that connect people. And so faraway places start going, a local big fish in a small pond starts going, why don't I just run my little pond? Why do I have to send money back to Rome? I don't even know who those idiots are. No one's in charge. So why don't I just be in charge here? And so those localities begin to go their own way. So is the Roman Empire doomed? No, it turns out it's not. Not yet. Why? Because what the Roman Empire really needs is stability, is one person in charge. It needs another Augustus. Somebody who can take over, reconnect all those bonds, re-impress people with the power of the emperor. And that's exactly what seems to happen. Diocletian, followed by, after a brief civil war, Constantine. And the idea is what Rome really needs is stability. It needs an end to these civil wars. And it gets it with Diocletian. Now, Diocletian is going to be the first Roman emperor to retire. You know how, like, Benedict was the first pope in, like, 600 years to retire. Like, emperors don't retire, they die. Diocletian retires. The problem with that was Diocletian left 2 successors, not 1. In fact, he kind of left 4 successors, to be honest. And what happened is, but there were 2 and 2, and what happened is they fought each other until one of them lived. There could be only one emperor at the moment, and that's going to be Constantine. And what Constantine does is legalize Christianity. He becomes, later in his life, a Christian. And what this allows him to do is to tap into a previously unused population. The Christians, who were these believers, these Roman believers, in this new religion, this new God Christ. Now, the Christians, of course, say, no, we're not new, knowing that Romans hate new things. They respect old things and hate new things. That they say, no, we're just worshiping the old Jewish God, Yahweh. We're old. And the Romans are like, yeah, no, this is weird and it's new and we're going to persecute you. And so you get persecutions here and there, and the last great persecutions are actually under Diocletian. And as the story goes, during the civil wars, Constantine at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge has a dream of Christ and the angels coming to him and saying, fight under my banner. And the banner is the P and the X, the Chi Rho, the first 2 letters of Christ. Fight under my banner, and I will give you victory. Well, Constantine's a Roman leader. The gods are supposed to talk to you in your sleep, in your dreams. So he tells his army to put the Chi Rho on the big P and then the X on their shields. They win the victory. The guy they're fighting against drowns, falls off the Milvian Bridge and drowns in his retreat. Constantine captures Rome. It is a glorious victory. So Constantine legalizes Christianity. All right, this God has power. This is one of the many gods. That's cool. And then on his deathbed or right before he dies, he is baptized to being a Christian. And in the earliest days, you kind of wanted to do this because baptism wiped away all your sins. So you wanted to get baptized as close to death as possible so you didn't have more sins. That's the way the thinking was. So what that allowed was Constantine to now turn to all those Christians, which were maybe by this point 5-8% of the population, maybe a little more, but to bring them out of hiding, to bring them into government, to bring them into the army. He's able to tap people who are now going to be loyal, who were previously outside the government's ability to use. Then he's going to build Constantinople, this giant Christian capital in the East. And we're going to talk a lot about Constantinople in this class in part 3. And it's where Greece, it's in Europe, it's where Istanbul is today. It's where Greece meets Asia Minor. It was called the Hellespont. Hellas, Hellespont, is the end of Greece. And on this other side of the inlet was Asia. And there's been a city there. It was Byzantium. Then Constantine's going to build Constantinople. and then it's now today Istanbul. And this is going to be a Christian capital. See, Rome was a pagan city, and Constantine wasn't really liked by the Romans, and the Christians weren't really liked by the Romans. They were old school, they were pagan, and so he needed a new capital anyway. He didn't really like Rome, and so he needed a new place. And besides, the big enemy wasn't in the West. Rome is in the middle of nowhere in the Roman Empire. Like, the Romans made Rome important. There's no reason geographically Rome should be important. It's the Romans made it important. The problem is it's far away from the front lines of your big borders. And so what Constantine basically does is build Beijing. He builds a capital near the border of his most powerful enemy, which at the time were the Persians. So he builds this capital, takes Byzantium, this Greek town, Greek port city, and turns it into a massive capital, Christian capital. And this shows that by 300 AD, Rome is just less important. It's this pagan city. It's big, it's economically important, but after 100 years of civil war, it's just not all that anymore. Roman politics has moved it from the center of the world to, it's a nice city, sure, but it's not the center of the world anymore. So all we need is for Diocletian to run the show and nothing bad to happen. And guess what happens? Something bad happens. Diocletian will actually murder his wife, murder his eldest son, who is more popular than, not Diocletian, Constantine. Constantine will murder his wife and then murder his eldest son. And when he died, two of Constantine's sons took over. One took over in Constantinople. The other went to Rome and claimed Rome. Because the problem with Constantinople is it's so far in the east that, like, whereas Rome wasn't near anything, it also wasn't far from everything. Constantinople, on the other hand, is in the east. It's much closer to Greece. It's very close to Asia Minor. It's close to Persia. But it's very far from Britain, from Gaul, from Portugal, from Morocco. And so you have another emperor in Rome. So you have two emperors, one in Constantinople and one in Rome. Are they going to work together? No, they're brothers. They like each other, but they have different needs. The emperor in Rome is going to look towards Gaul and Spain. He's going to look west for his problems that he needs to solve. While the emperor in Constantinople is going to look obviously north to the Danube River and east to Persia as his problems. So by not having one unified emperor in one unified capital, the Roman Empire is beginning to break up. It's still acting like, it still thinks of itself as one unity. But now it's kind of like one body, two heads. The Russian and Austrian flags, maybe even the German imperial flag, worked the same way. They had the eagle crest, but with two heads, one looking west and one looking east. The Byzantines might have had that same kind of eagle crest as well. But that's how it is. It's one body, but with two different heads, looking two different ways. Could that survive? Maybe. Maybe not. But in any case, it needed nothing bad to happen. And what happens is something bad happens. The Huns show up. The Huns from Central Asia have been kicked out of East Asia by the Han dynasty of China. And they go barreling across Central Asia. Now, they're out of history. We don't know what they did. But whatever they did, they scared the hell out of a lot of people because they just kept coming. They don't stop. And they enter into Europe, into the Russian forests, the steppes of the Ukraine, and then they barrel into Eastern Europe. And they scare everyone. They are the great nomadic horse people of the Bible, of the book of Revelations. You know how the book of Revelations talks about the end of the world? And what does it talk about? It talks about 4 horsemen coming. It doesn't talk about armies. It doesn't talk about ranks and phalanxes. It talks about nomads on horses. And that's death and famine and pestilence and war. Now, the book of Revelations is written somewhere around 100 AD. It's a book of the good emperors. It's a book written when things were stable. So it tells us what scared Romans. And notice what scares Romans is not settled peoples, not cities, not armies, not phalanxes. What scared them was the nomads on their horses. And who shows up? Nomads on horses. And they come barreling into Eastern Europe, and that scares the people of Eastern Europe, primarily the Germans and the Goths. Now, the Germans were this confederation of German-speaking tribes that mostly lived in the forests of Central Europe and fought each other. And occasionally they go over the Rhine River and fight the Romans. They kicked the Romans out by killing Varus and his 3 legions, and they created a border, and that border it would trade. There'd be some immigration. During the 3rd century crisis, different Roman emperors would hire Germans as auxiliary troops, as additional mercenaries. So the Germans knew how the Romans fought in a kind of at least, if not professional way, at least in a provincial way. And they were the people of this northeastern border, this northern border. The Goths had been Scandinavians. The Goths had come out of Scandinavia into Poland and moved into the Danubian plain, where the Carpathian Mountains are, central Eastern Europe, near the Black Sea. So they had pushed out who the other peoples were there. They had absorbed some of them. And they move into what is today Hungary and Romania, southern Poland. So the Swedish kings, my Swedish kings of my dissertation, called themselves King of the Goths. That was one of their titles, Kings of the Goths. So when the Huns show up, they scare the Germans and the Goths. And the Germans and the Goths, this is like Miley Cyrus on her wrecking ball. If Miley Cyrus is coming at you on her wrecking ball, you don't stand there. You get out of the way. Because she's coming at you on a wrecking ball. Wrecking ball. And so the Germans have only one way to go. West, into Gaul, into the Roman Empire. And that's where they go. And the Goths have only one way to go. South, into the Roman Empire. So you get this flood of people coming over the borders. Is that a problem? No, actually not really. Because the Romans have Natio. So nomadic horsemen from Asia, the Huns, burst into Europe. They wreak havoc. The Goths and the Germans get out of the way of Miley Cyrus's wrecking ball. They enter the Roman Empire. But because the Romans had Natio, this is not a problem. All the Romans need to do is defeat the Goths in a big battle, make them into Romans, assimilate them into the Roman Empire, turn them around, and in a combined Gothic Roman army, fight the Huns, defeat the Huns, win. Send the Huns back to Central Asia, settle the Goths on a new Roman province called Gothica, and boom, the Roman Empire survives. It gets stronger. It gets bigger by absorbing a new people and their new homeland. Done. Easy. All you have to do is win. All we have to be is DJ Khaled. All we have to do is win. Done. So what happens? Well, at Adrianople, we definitely lose. It's a complete disaster. The Roman army goes off to fight with its weak emperor and is crushed. The emperor himself is murdered after being wounded. At least this is several stories. Oh, he died running away. Oh, he died fighting. The most famous story is he was wounded, and he and a couple of his homeboys fled to a farmhouse and barricaded themselves in, and the Goths found them in the farmhouse, and instead of breaking in and taking him hostage, they just lit it on fire and burned him alive. And that's a good story because it tells you the attitude. That's a better story than the emperor goes down fighting, especially if the emperor didn't go down fighting. And it's not really sure the emperor went down fighting here. He didn't seem to be that kind of emperor. The emperor killed while running away? All right. But the we're going to murder him in the farmhouse shows that they just don't respect the Roman army, the Roman emperor, and Roman culture. So they're certainly not going to convert. See, the whole idea of Nascia was Roman society, Roman culture, Roman arms are better. So become us. We'll make you like us because we're better than you. So you want to become us. Well, the Goths, having crushed the Roman army at Adrianople, says these guys, these are the guys we are afraid of? These are the Romans we heard so much about? These guys? Really? And so what happens is the Goths aren't going to stay on the borderlands. They're not going to listen to some new guy who says, I'm the emperor, listen to me. No, they just overrun Eastern Europe. They just overrun the Eastern Roman Empire. They're looking for a new homeland away from where the Huns are. And so they're looking for a place. And so the natural place to go is Constantinople. So they go to Constantinople, the biggest city around. And they go there. And that's where they run into something they did not expect, which is massive Roman walls. The walls built around Constantinople are going to be famous because the Romans build these walls to keep out a Roman army. Now you have to understand something. The Romans were, until the age of gunpowder, until the age of cannon, are the greatest siege engineers in history as an army. The Romans could capture anything. 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 During the Jewish revolt in 70 AD, about 200 Jewish rebels, hid in Masada. This cliff, this like monastery, this fort. It was actually it was originally built by the pro-Roman Jewish king Herod as like a safe house. It's a castle on this like little mesa mountain. You know, it's flat at the top, but it has sheer cliffs. The only way to get up there was like through baskets, like a basket elevator. That's it. And they hid out there, and they're like, the rebellion will go on forever. Well, a Roman army showed up and said, we could take that. Now, there's no way to capture them. They had food, they had supplies. It was made for Herod to hold out in case the Jews ever revolted against him. And because he was a terrible king, he assumed they were going to revolt against him. So it had everything. It had water, it had food. It could hold out for years. The idea was the Romans will get bored and go away. No. You know what the Romans did? They built a mountain next to the fort. Those sheer cliffs, they just built a ramp that went all the way up. They just built an on-ramp. It took them a year, but they did it. That's the Romans. The Romans could capture anything. In Gaul, the Romans besieged the Gallic, one of the Gallic kings, Vercingetorix, and a relieving army of Gauls was coming to smash the Caesar and his Roman army. And so his Roman army was going to be trapped between the rock and the hard place because it was laying siege to one city, but that meant it could be besieged. It could be attacked from behind. So what did the Romans do? Build walls. Build like 20, 30, 60 miles of walls to defend themselves. So they were besieging on the inside and then besieged from the outside, and they beat everybody. So when the Goths see Constantinople and they see these massive walls, they don't know what to do with that. The Goths don't live in a city with walls. The Goths live in little villages made of sticks. So they look at this and go, what do we do? And the answer was, go somewhere else. Now they'll end up, the Goths will end up in Italy and capture Rome in 410. They'll sack Rome in 410. And then they'll end up in Spain. That's how far away from the Huns they want to get. Meanwhile, because the Roman army has just been destroyed by the Goths, the Germans can cross over the Rhine. Because with the Roman emperor dead, one of the generals on the Rhine says, "Well, I'm going to Italy. I'm going to become the emperor." And so he takes his army. He leaves the border. He heads south, and in 406, it's cold enough that the Rhine actually freezes, and the Germans just come just over the border. Let me show you the map. If you're watching the video, there's this map, and this is all of the invasions of all the different peoples. Notice there's almost no invasion in the yellow in Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. Why? Because look at those lines that keep bending in and then shooting back out. Bending in and shooting back out. That's Constantinople. Constantinople protected the East, Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt, from invasions. Italy, on the other hand, look at all the lines that go to Rome. They go up, they come down into Italy, into the Western Roman Empire. They come down into Italy. They sack Rome, and then they go somewhere else, to Spain. The Vandals end up in North Africa. They all want to get away from the Huns. Well, that brings us to what happens. In 410, Rome is sacked by the Goths. In 476, there's a teenage emperor somebody put on the throne, and the Ostrogoths, the Eastern Goths chief, basically walks in and says, "Take a vacation and never come back." And the kid goes, "Okay, I'll just leave. Bye." And it's like the weirdest way for an empire to end. It's like the Roman emperor just was fired. And so you have the end of Roman power in the West. Because without the Roman army, without a strong Roman emperor, local provinces have to protect themselves. And so you just get the breakup. You get people just don't believe in Rome anymore in Western Europe, in Spain, in Portugal, in France, in Britain, in Morocco, in Algeria, the places that will become these places. They just don't believe in it anymore, so they do their own thing. But the Huns are still rampaging around. And they're looking for a new homeland. So they're looking to turn Europe into a Turkish-speaking nomadic horse paradise. And so that's the question, is what will happen to Europe? Will Europe remain Europe? The land of settled peoples, of big trade cities, of romantic languages, of Latin-based languages and writing, of Greek philosophy and Christianity, Christian Jewish religion, or is it going to be something Central Asian? Turkish, nomadic, free-ranging, no cities. Is Europe going to be turned into what Turkey was turned into? Because this is exactly the process that happened to Turkey. Turkey is going to go from a Greek, urban, Christian land, a European land, to Turkish, nomadic, Muslim. Now, the Huns aren't Muslim yet, but not Christian. So this is the precise thing that happened to Asia Minor. Now, that's not going to happen for another 1,000 years, or I shouldn't say that, another 600 years. But the question is, could that have happened to the entire continent? And the answer is, yeah, sure. Why not? Why couldn't the Huns have done it? So why don't we all speak Turkish? And the answer is the Battle of Shalon. Battle of Shalon in 451 is the Huns, Attila, and his Hunnish horde fighting against the infantry army of a combined Germanic Franks and what's left of the Roman army, a reconstituted Roman army. In some ways, this is the first battle for Western civilization. Because this is really the battle, in some ways, that decides what will happen to Europe, which way it will go. Now, Nacio said it should be the Roman army with their friends, the Franks, the Germanic Franks. But after Adrianople, that's not true anymore. The Roman army is now the second player, is the little cousin. It's not big enough, it's not strong enough, it doesn't have the ability to impress anybody anymore. And so it's the auxiliary, and it's the Germanic Franks who are the lead. And they fight this battle, and it is a vicious, vicious battle. And the Germanic Franks and the Roman army win. The last battle, the last major battle the Roman army ever fights in the West, the West Roman army ever fights, is a victory. It defeats the Huns. It saves Europe for Europeans. It saves Europe for Christianity. But it's Nacio in reverse. Instead of the Germans Romanizing, instead of the Germans becoming Roman, it's the Romans who will become Germanic. See Christmas. See the days of the week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? That's Teesdag, Onsdag, Torsdag. Those are Scandinavian gods. Those are Germanic gods. They're not Christian Roman gods, right? Sunday remains Christian, right? It remains German. And so does Saturday, right? Saturday, right? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Freitag. Those are all Germans. And so the Romans will become Germanic. So look at English. Look at how German English is compared to how Latin French is. And that shows you what's happening. Look at Christmas. Christmas is a Christian holiday put on top of a pagan holiday, the winter solstice. Jesus was not born on December 25th. He just wasn't. But Christianity needed a way to compete with paganism. And so the reason you have a Christmas tree is because, remember, the Germans worshipped trees that didn't die in the winter. They nailed heads to those trees. Remember Varus. And so German culture is now going to be put on top of the Latin Roman culture that had existed of the Roman Empire. And you're going to get this amalgam that's going to create Europe, the Europe of the Middle Ages. So that is the end of the Roman Empire in the West. Now, the Roman Empire in the East continues. Constantinople does not fall. Antioch, Alexandria are not sacked. No Germans or Goths ever go there. And so half the Roman Empire collapsed, and we'll go into the period that historians started to call the Dark Ages. But the East, the Roman East, kept on chugging. It was a little bruised, sure. It had to recover Greece. But for the most part, the fall of Rome is something that happened to Rome, not to Romans in the East, who are more Christian, more urbanized, more populous, more educated. It's the better part of the Roman Empire. The East continues, and we'll talk about that when we get to part 3. But the West is going into its dark ages. That's Spain, that's Portugal, that's France, that's Italy, that's Britain. They are going into the early Middle Ages. So that's the end of the Romans. So be safe, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.